Well, for the first time ever, Multnomah County has a by name database focused on the number of people experiencing homelessness, a snapshot of who is on our streets and where they are. Those numbers come with a new dashboard for the public as well. It's something experts and county leaders have been waiting for the county to track for years.
This is a really exciting day and an exciting milestone for our work in addressing our homelessness crisis.
Okay, so why does all of this matter? Well, some argue data is a critical way to help resolve this crisis. It will inform policy and budget decisions, and we know that's key, especially right now, seeing as Multnomah County is in the middle of filling a roughly $100 million budget gap in just its homeless services department. Here's Anna Plum, who will take over as interim director of that department after Dan Field retires in June.
We need to make data-driven decisions to lead to reductions in homelessness. This will set up our frontline workers, our decision makers, and our community to understand all at the same time what we're doing and what we need to do more of and where we could improve.
So before today, Multnomah County leaders have been relying on what's called the point-in-time count, a federally required count of the number of people on the streets that happens once every other year. County officials say that count has failed to show if real progress was being made. But now, that's all changing.
Now we have our own local tool, a new tool that significantly enhances our understanding of who is experiencing homelessness by providing data from the most accurate by name list of people experiencing homelessness that Multnomah County has ever produced.
So here is part of the county's new data dashboard. Now, before you fall asleep with the sound of a data dashboard, stick with me because these numbers are eye-opening. The most recent data shows that in February, so 2 months ago, 14,864 people were homeless in Multnomah County. To put that number into perspective, according to the last point-in-time count, which was done in 2023, just over 6,000 people were said to have been homeless in Multnomah County. And the last time the county released its own count, not the federally required one, was January of last year. And they said at that time, there was just over 11,000 people experiencing homelessness. So another undercount compared to this new data. Here's why that is, according to county leaders.
The numbers have increased. That, one of the things that means is that we are actually doing a better job of identifying people who need help. The work of transformation is really hard. We can't ignore this data. Nobody in this room wants to be ignoring this data, but we really need to take up the challenge that it presents us to do more and to do better.
What we see is that as we increase our services, we find more folks, we speak with more folks, we serve more folks, more data goes into the system, and the list increases.
Okay, so if you look at this bar graph, the dark blue here shows out of the more than 14,000 people homeless in February, nearly 6,800 were unsheltered. That's on the street, in a tent, or in a vehicle. And this middle yellow bar shows nearly 4,900 people were sheltered. That means staying in an emergency shelter or a tiny home. And for 3,200 people, that far one there, it was unknown where they were staying.
This data also validates what many of us have experienced over the last 5 years, that far too many people are sleeping on the streets in Multnomah County.
All right, now to another piece of this new data, what's called inflow and outflow. Inflow is the number of people who newly became homeless over a certain period of time. And outflow is the number of people who exited homelessness during that same time. Now, let's be real. Tracking homelessness is a really tough thing to do since it's people we're talking about, many who often don't want to be tracked. So these numbers, they're not perfect, but they do, for the first time, give us a look at progress, or lack thereof, being made to get people off the streets.
So you might hear folks say inflow or outflow into homelessness. More technically, it's inflow into our data system of folks we understand to be accessing our services. And from the service data, we can tell if they are homeless, recently housed, what services they're using, et cetera.
Okay, so here's the inflow, outflow for February of this year. Nearly 1,400 people became homeless and 881 people left homelessness. So what does that mean? Well, this blue graph here gives some more detail. The dark blue, the tallest line across the board from month to month, is all the homeless people that are new to the county's data system. If we look at the last line for the month of February, it shows just over 1,000 people connected with homeless services for the first time. 171 people during that same time returned from permanent housing. That's when people who had housing the month before through the county programs are now estimated to be back on the streets. And for 181 people, they showed up in the by name database for the first time in a while. Previously, they were listed as inactive.
What we see is that people are entering homelessness faster than we can return them to housing. And I'll show some data on who we are serving in housing. We are serving thousands of people in housing. And yet people are entering homelessness at a faster rate. And we know why this is happening. And a lot of those elements are outside of the control of the Homeless Services Department.
Okay, so what are those elements? Well, county leaders point to a housing shortage, including a lack of affordable housing, inflation, high eviction rates, the mental health crisis, and the fentanyl crisis, which from my time reporting on the streets, I know keeps many people there. So that was all about inflow. Let's briefly talk about outflow, those who left homelessness and are no longer on the streets. Well, that number is consistently lower than the number of people becoming homeless, except for 1 month last spring. All right, the brown are the number of people moving into permanent housing, and the light yellow are the number of people moving to inactive status, which means people who had been previously using homeless services are not showing up anymore, or they're deceased. It's hard to tell. Again, looking at the month of February, on the end, 387 people were permanently housed. Awesome. But nearly 500 moved to that inactive status. Now, the county is also tracking shelter services and demographics of homeless people. For example, in the month of February, more than half the people on the streets identified as male, a majority of them white and between the ages of 25 and 44. 20% of those on the streets were black. As for shelter, it shows in the month of February, there were about 200 empty shelter beds. All right, now for you data lovers out there, if you want a closer look at all of this, including who is experiencing chronic homelessness, we have a link to the dashboard on our website, kgw.com. Now, a big issue surrounding the homeless crisis in our region is the cost. Yesterday, Multnomah County commissioners held a briefing looking at the city and county shelter systems. But one thing that really stood out to us was the cost. Take a look. Lots of numbers here, but we'll highlight the ones to pay attention to. This is looking at the Multnomah County shelter system, only the ones run by its Homeless Services Department. More than $70 million are budgeted for those shelters, but look at the average cost per unit per year. More than $36,000, which means that each one of the county's shelter beds costs, on average, $100 every night of the year. Okay, so how about the city of Portland? $40 million budgeted for shelters, representing a cost of over $45,000 per year per bed. We're back right after this.